Well, I have to follow Joel and Mark. What an amazing session that was.
Was it okay?
Yes, it was very interesting. I managed to listen to most of it. It's 8 p.m. here, so there was still a bit of evening activities going on, putting the child to bed and whatnot, but yes, very enthralling.
Oh, nice.
And here I am to continue onwards with some minor little logic things that you can do inside Apex.
Come on, you're a superstar. You're a legend in the community. You're a legend in my mind.
Well, thank you, Joel.
Right.
Well, I might as well kick off then, hey? All right. So here I am in Australia. It's 8 p.m. And I'm here to talk about a dozen things to do with Oracle Apex. I'll try and look at the camera over here, but I've also got this nice big screen now that I'm working from home. I've got wonderful 32 inches to adore it. But I've recently converted this presentation from a Prezi to a very web-friendly PowerPoint. So it's my first time in PowerPoint for a while, so hopefully that'll go okay as well. Oh, there we go. Making sure I'm moving forward too. So a programmer's dozen things to do with Oracle Apex because there's about 12, might be more or less. So a general career timeline for myself. Wow, that white screen is now illuminating my face. I did 7 odd years hard time with Oracle Forms and Oracle Reports. It was a very interesting experience. But come around 2007, when I did my first presentation, I started moving towards Oracle Apex, which was around 3.1-ish. And it was a great transition. I did a number of things. I wrote a video series. I started with an amazing company. And then from then on, we had an age of productivity where Apex 5 came out and all things were just amazing. I somehow published a book. I visited my first Kscope conference. And now we're working on 19C, doing a bit of AOP. Things are wonderful for us. And I was thinking of publishing something new as well, but then 2020 came along and we're no longer going to Kscope in Boston, but we're all working from home and working this out and having this amazing 24 hours. This is a wonderful thing to be a part of, and I feel very privileged. If you follow me on Twitter, you may notice that I like all things astronomy. So a little piece of me. This is one of my favourite shots. I just love things astronomy. So that's a part of me outside the Oracle world. So as far as the features I'm going to cover today, there's a range, a big spectrum of Oracle Apex features, and I'm just going to cover a couple of them. And they spread from wonderfully awesome features to things that get the job done. Today I'll be talking about dynamic actions, build options, and the request parameter. So nothing major here. I'm not talking about PWAs or any of these other wonderful things I see on the list for the next 24 hours or so, but some essentials. And to get our 12 odd features out here, each of these features I'll try to cover a few suggestions on how they could be utilised. And that doesn't quite out to 12 either, so there's a few variations on some of these features. And like I said, on the scheme of things, build options, request parameter, and dynamic actions, they're not the most difficult things to deal with, but dynamic actions are essential. But on the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at developer tools in the browser and creating plugins and integrating with BI, we're on the lower end. So this presentation is to keep things at a low level and keep it quite light. So low level but light. So build options, a smarter form of the never attribute, shall we call it. So there's been a number of times where I've gone into a page and I'm thinking, why isn't this component displaying? And I wander down and I see that it's set to never. And you think, okay, why is this set to never? Are there any comments on here? What's going on? Thankfully now the page designer has been improved to show some recognition of when things are never. So we see it crossed out there and it's easy to identify, but we want to know why. I think build options are a fantastic way of making that reason known. It adds context to why you may be hiding a particular component, whether it be a column, a region, a page. It can be a component of any kind. So when you create a build option, it's just defining a thing that you could allocate to a particular page component. And for any particular application, that could be set to always be included, or something to exclude until a certain time when you feel it's required. So what reasons might we have to apply such variations? Well, I'll give you a couple. There's a dev-only build option that I like to use, that I like to allocate to things that are only available in the development environment, either tools or things I'm playing around with, or whatever the case may be. It's set to include in our local development environment. So when we run our application, these components are visible. But when we export this application and import it to a new environment, it's automatically excluded. Perhaps it's not ready, perhaps it's not relevant for that particular environment. That's something we can control using those attributes. The other thing we might do this sort of thing on with the dev-only build option is sandpit things, stuff that you are just playing around with in the development environment that you don't want to migrate forward, depending on how you manage your applications and things like this. Dev tools that are only really useful in the development environment, or ways to unit test your code because you're setting data up, then you need to remove stuff to apply another attempt at these tests that you're doing.
Hey Scott.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. A couple of people have said that your voice is a bit low, and I'm not asking you to not be yourself, but you might need to increase your volume a little bit, please.
That's all right. I'll try adjusting that and speaking up a little bit. I have closed the door. It should be fine for me to talk up a little bit. My 6-year-old isn't really bothered that much with noises about the house, so I'll increase the volume a bit and see how we go.
Thank you. Perfect.
Excellent. Mockups are similar to the dev tools, but in a different bucket for me. Build options. Yeah, I don't want these things displayed in as I migrate my applications. But I would like to play around with them in the development environment. Maybe this application's in dev for a while, and I play with things. I have a report that works in a particular way, and maybe I'll try it out as an interactive report instead, or do some administrations that I might want to roll back. So I might duplicate my region, apply my variations of an idea, and think, is it good? I'll continue with that. Is it bad? No. And I just don't want to delete my my plays yet. I want to keep them there, don't display them, but have them there as reference until I'm ready to physically remove them. But better than showing never, because I now have that context. Oh, they're just mock-ups. I'm just playing with those until I'm ready to remove them. And then I have a build option called to be removed. Dead code sleeping. I want to remove this thing, but for whatever reason, I want to keep it there as reference, but it's like comments, but you don't really want to keep your comments in your production PL SQL. And I guess it's up to everyone to decide, well, how long do they keep components inside an application until they're ready to, yes, I'm going to remove this, or I've got a copy of it elsewhere. So simple applications for a simple feature, but different ideas on how to apply it. Another common one is to use this to apply to your relevant builds. You have a feature that you're building, and you might tag them all as build X, and then you've got another set of features that you're building that may not be ready for deployment when X is. So you could have some ready to include, and all your build Y is set to exclude when you export your application. So include what's ready in your exports. And what you can use with these build option features is a little report here to tell you where all your components are. So as you're tagging your pages, your regions, your buttons with this particular build option, you can then use this report to find out where they all are. Perhaps the build option is no longer relevant and you're happy to remove the option, or you just want to see where all those particular features have been applied. Or maybe you're just using the build option to tag certain things. You're not necessarily including or excluding them, but you might just use this option to tag features and find where all particular instances of a particular thing are within your application. So the utilization feature is a useful page for me to locate these components that I've tagged. So to move forward with the next feature, the request parameter. It's the fourth parameter in our Apex URL, the original URL, not necessarily the friendly URL that we see now in 20.1. So as we look through the parameter list here, application page session request, debug cache item and the value and whether it's in printer friendly mode. And something I created early on for myself to remember the order in which these come. All programmers should read delightfully creative information. It's a true statement. I try to read delightfully creative information all the time. And yeah, as I wander my cursor through the URL to make tweaks, I do use that in my head to count the colons and get to this request parameter. What do we use it for? Oh, sorry, here's another way of visualizing that I shared on Twitter recently. This is where it's from. For those that like things in tables as opposed to long URLs. Where would we use these request parameters? Well, they come naturally with your buttons. When you press a button that submits a page, that button name is the value that goes through as the request value. If you have a dynamic action who at some point submits the page, you can put a request button name in there, and then in your page processing, you can use that to decide which particular processes get executed, which validations, computations, what branches get executed based on what button was pressed. So you might process a particular set of actions if the request is create and the create again button. So you want to do it for both those buttons, run this process and branch a particular way based on that request versus that request. So we quite probably do this all the time already, but what other things can we do with the request parameter? Well, security timeouts. We can have a little bit more exciting version of this. Your session has expired, but what if we want to do that in a nicer or different way? In the security attributes for your application, you can wander down and find the session management session timeout URL. And if we specify that F*P syntax and specify our application alias and the login page, and then also include any value you like really in that request parameter, and in this case maybe supply the word timeout, so that on your login page you can display a region based on that request value. Say, well, if the request value was timeout, display a message saying my session has timed out. Well, that's a nice start for this conceptual idea, but the trouble is by the time you finished your first beer after your session is timed out, when you hit login again, it'll tell you your session has expired. And I think, well, what session? I'm not logged in. I don't have a session. But the login page itself has a session that needed a session on the database to render that login page. And at some point, when you hit that login button after too long, it'll tell you that your session's expired already and you haven't yet logged in. Not the nicest user experience. So you can apply that same concept with both regions on that page. You say, well, our timeout alert, let's display that when the request is a timeout. But when we don't want to display the normal region on our page, we say, well, when the request is not equal to the value timeout, let's not display that region and put a button on that alert that says, well, just refresh this page and go back to the login screen again. Give it a session ID 0, which ensures it forces a new session, and they can hit their login, their saved password in their Chrome, and they're away. That's one use for our request parameter. Another one is for application availability. There's a native feature inside Apex where you can, per application, say an application is unavailable. And when you go to navigate to that application, you'll see a message that looks like this. Again, not the snazziest of messages out there, but you can zhuzh it up a little bit with your own styling in that message for unavailable application box. Which we had to do at one point when we had our applications on a tablet. We might have this application unavailable, but they can't refresh or anything because the address bar and whatnot's removed from their view. All they've got is this shell of a web application. So we needed to be able to at least refresh or go back. We can use PL SQL in that region, which enables us to at least encapsulate whatever we display on that page, but we're still not controlling who accesses what application when, which is what I really wanted out of this. because we might have a number of applications. So we might have, say, a main menu that's pointing to a number of different applications in our environment, but all, as far as the user is concerned, the one application. But let's say space is currently unavailable because space is closed because of the coronavirus. So how do we stop people navigating to that application, or if they do, or if they're already in there and they refresh a page, send them back to this main menu and tell them, sorry, this application is currently suspended because we're doing some work on it. So as we can see here, I've got in my URL, application suspended in my request parameter, as highlighted here. And that was done using a couple of things. First of all, I needed just a table that told me which applications are available, and of course we can create some sort of page in our environment to tick which ones are and which ones aren't available due to repairs or upgrades or whatever the case may be. And then I thought, well, how do I manage those users that are already inside that application, or go to the main menu and go to click on that option? I can hide the option, which is great for those new users, but what about users that are already there? So I tried using the verify function, which I thought was a great idea, because it basically runs every time you load a page and runs a function that returns a true or false. And I thought, well, I can use that. I can say, well, I'm in this application. Is it still available, true or false? And it redirected them to that particular URL, but unfortunately it forced the expiry of the session. So that wasn't really what I wanted to do for them. I just wanted to take them back to the main menu and let them go somewhere else. So the alternative I found was having an application process in the application. That sounds like a tautology, doesn't it? So inside this application process, which is the first application process that runs when I load that page, I go through a check and I say, well, am I on the main menu? Because if I am, I don't really need to run this check. Is my application currently available? So the application ID that I'm currently using, is it currently available? If not, redirect to a particular URL, my main menu, the home page, and call it suspended, just as I showed you previously. And this bit of PL SQL here redirects the user to that particular page and stops processing what we see on that, what the user would normally see on that page. And that's how we apply that to effect. And I wanted to note this exists function here. The query is something an example I picked up from the real life Tom. I wonder if Connor's listening right now. I'm sure he might be. But yes, back when Tom Kite was running the page, this was and still seems to be the most efficient way to determine whether a record exists. But that's a tangent for another day. A third reason that we might use the request parameter is usage analysis, a tongue twister. How do users use the system, or what ways do people use to get to certain pages? So on this page, for example, we have cards and a list. And I want to know, well, are people using the drop-down menu list, or are they using the cards to click on where they want to go? What navigation is working for them? What navigation aren't people bothering to use? So on our cards, for example, we could, in our query, which is a view in this particular case, inside the URL, add an additional card. Add an additional parameter in the request value and that literal string of card. So when we open that particular application and that page, it'll have this in the URL. It won't necessarily do anything. It could do, but in this case, it's just there to know that when that page is opened, that request was used, and I'll show you why in a second. As for the list, again, another view, and in this case, it's using the request parameter with the value of menu, so card, menu. And what we can do with that information is that inside the Apex Workspace activity log, which is the best log table ever, for analysing who's using your application when, we can use this to query and find out for our application what request values were used. Was it card or menu? And maybe you've got large amounts on the card, very minimal usage on the menu. That should be list, shouldn't it? I've dummied up the wrong code. Card versus list. You can use that to work out, well, are people using a certain button on your page versus some other method of doing the same thing. to help you work out what's working, what's not working, what the users are engaged with. So this page is just recording, sorry, this table is just recording every visit from your application and logging who, when, what page, what request value, and a couple of other things there as well. So you could use this to do some usage analysis on your application users. Next one, dynamic actions. I believe I'm pairing through this, but I think the dynamic actions one is the longest. Dynamic actions are fantastic. They're one of my favorite additions from about 4, I think, Apex version 4. It's basically there so we don't have to write JavaScript, or as much JavaScript. We can get away with doing a lot of stuff with just one line of JavaScript. And not even that. These dynamic actions are there for you to just click, 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 and make your applications interactive. But we can do a little bit more with very small lines of JavaScript. So for example, no data found. Let's say you have a region on the page and you want to hide it when there's no results. Instead of seeing the empty region displayed with no data found shown or whatever value you have in that no data found attribute. Excuse me. Well, there's 2 ways you can do this. You can do it with a server-side condition that essentially replicates the query that you have in your region already to say, well, are there any records in here? Should I bother showing it? Or you can use a dynamic action to hide that region on the client. So when the page is rendered or when the region is refreshed through some other interaction on the page, this dynamic action will execute and say, well, is the region empty? If it is, hide it. Otherwise, show it. How does that dynamic region work? Well, with a little knowledge of selectors on your page. Selectors are things that you can identify your web page components, your HTML, with essentially a query, but not a SQL query, a selector which queries your web page that says, well, whereabout on my web page is there a no data found message? So the way I do that is in my dynamic action, we've got this triggering element syntax here, which identifies what's just happened, whether it be clicking on a button or in this case, an event of having just refreshed a region. So that triggering element there is our region. So inside that region, can we find the class no data found? And that class, when you inspect that element on your page, is surrounding that there is no data found message that is always displayed there. So if that's present, then there is no data in your report. If that isn't present, if when we test the length of the resulting what is sent back by this particular syntax here, if it's empty, then there are results on our page. There's no data found message. There's actual rows there, so we don't want to hide it. So that expression right there is a JavaScript expression which returns a true or false value. And based on that true or false value, we hide or show our, or in this case, whatever we want. And I've specified the region here. And with this concept, Ask Tom is now faster. You're welcome. No, seriously, kind of, I think it was a Twitter discussion where this came up, or maybe I did a blog post and kind of said, I can use that on Ask Tom. And I'm sure people can use it anywhere. No data found, well, not on no data found, but another example of what we can do here in a similar vein, change text based on search criteria. So you might have a region on the page that as someone types in a value in a text box, you can have a key release trigger that automatically refreshes that region. But sometimes that can cause issues because they might be typing so quickly they've sent half a dozen requests to refresh that region on the page. So maybe you want to limit that down to perhaps when they hit tab or hit enter. How can we do that? Well, this is one way of many, and no doubt people who are probably better than me at using dynamic actions and those plugin creators out there could describe a number of different ways of doing this. Just like any SQL statement, really, there's half a dozen ways you can write a piece of SQL to do something. There's half a dozen ways you can write a dynamic action to do something. Here's one way. So after a refresh of the region, yes, that's right. That's what we're doing here. I am a step ahead of myself by one slide. I'm talking about two very similar things here, sorry. So here I'm changing the result of that no data found message based on what they've typed. So after the refresh of that particular region, I can test those two values to see if there is anything entered in a couple of search fields. Are those fields empty? And is this field empty? So there's a JavaScript expression to test whether two different values on our page are empty. So on our page, we might have a place to search something. If it's empty, for instance, when the page is open and they haven't typed a search yet, we might just want to say enter a search. But when they have actually typed in something, maybe we'd like to display nothing has been found using whatever they've typed in that search field. And we can essentially do a very similar expression. This triggering element, find our no data found message, and we want to rewrite it. We want to replace it with this text that says nothing found using concatenate with that plus symbol there. Don't get caught out with that like I do, because the double pipe that we use in Pure SQL is recognised syntax in JavaScript, which really means or. So if you put a double pipe in there, you'll always get the literal string displayed and never the message, and you'll go a bit crazy for a while trying to work out why what should be true isn't. Pluses in JavaScript. Hot tip. So that's now rewriting what we see in that no data found message with that script. This is the slide I was ahead of myself by. Refresh on key release. So as they're typing, if we're too fast, we want to reduce it to just tabs or pressing the enter key. So yeah, we might have a couple of search fields here and a search button, and we can do a key release still on our items. Let's say when a key has been entered, we're going to do something, but only in this client-side condition, as opposed to the server-side condition, which decides whether the dynamic action appears at all. The client-side condition that says, well, whatever we've just typed, is it the character 13, the enter key, or is it the character 9, which maps to a tab? If it's one of those two key presses, and there's that double pipe, the or, so is the key that we just pressed an enter, or is the key that we just pressed a tab? And that will execute the whatever the search button does. So we can have this as the action underneath this dynamic action. Or we can just have an action that does the actual refresh. Depends on how many actions you have underneath that particular button. But that client expression will help reduce the amount of executions that we have on this region, which may help. And we see this already with the new pop-up LEV. There's a setting there, a declarative setting, that allows you to only do a search in the pop-up LEV when a certain number of characters has been pressed, because sometimes you don't want to run a search when they've just typed B, because that could return too many results. You want a bit more search before you start refreshing the region for them. So the other dynamic action I want to talk about is with report buttons. So often we want to display row-level report buttons, but do it conditionally. And there's two different ways we can do this. So an example here is where we might have a list of users and we might want to add them to a list. But we only need to add them to a list when they're not yet on the list. And if they're already on the list, maybe we want to see a date there instead, this date here. Oh, you can see my mouse. And the other example is the reverse. Well, let's take them off some list and either remove them if they've already been removed, logically deleted in this case, then it displays the date instead and not the button. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. So this way, not necessarily the most secure way, but it might be sufficient for your enterprise application. Depending on what the feature is that you're controlling here, but you can have inside your SQL a case statement that says, well, in this case, controlled by the deleted date, a logically deleted value. If that's set, then my SQL is going to return the literal string hide me. And inside my attributes of my link field, I will include that class, or I'll include that literal string as a class next to all my other buttons and things that I've got here to make my link display as a button. And that class is somewhere on my page or in my application CSS file that is just hide me literal string I've got here and a display of none. So it's just hiding that button. So there's a security concern here, but I guess all your executions of whatever this does should be tested at the server anyway, because that's a nice practice to have. But it's one method of conditionally hiding those fields. No dynamic action required, actually. This is all done through the SQL we see here. Why did I originally have these under dynamic actions? So the second example is something we can do inside the SQL itself. We can generate the button, the exact same button using SQL based on some conditions. So in this case, it's joining to my application access table to see if they have access to a particular thing. If they don't, then I display the button. So I'll display a button that executes the JavaScript to say, we'll add this particular value, display it as a button, and this is the value that I'm adding. Otherwise, if they already have it, then I'm displaying this date of when they received that application, when they received whatever it is that we're adding here. So it either displays as a button or displays as that date text. And the server-side condition here. I've got myself in a twist here. I forgot what I was about to mention with that there. I've lost my context on that particular page. Server-side condition. Oh yes, something that's probably lost a bit of context here with the wrong screenshots. That column has a server-side condition of that, but it's irrelevant to the discussion here. I could probably remove that. That's what I'm pointing to. I've been waiting for my arrow to press to say, well, there's an arrow there saying escape special characters. That's why I had that screenshot there. The server-side condition is a red herring. So we need the escape special parameters attribute set to no, which is not the default. The default is yes. But we want to set it to no because we're generating some HTML inside our SQL here. We need to trust what we've generated here and get Apex to display exactly as shown. Otherwise, we will have that rendered and escaped, and we'll just see HTML code in our report, which is usually what we all see when we forget to check that box the first time we write this and render the page. We all do it. Whoever says they aren't are lying. So in summary, I am quite short on here. There's plenty of time for Q&A or other discussion. Far out. I've been trying to make sure I'm not over, and I don't do many webinars, and I've translated this from Prezi presentation because that doesn't work very well on the webinar to a PowerPoint, and I've done it in half an hour. So yes, build options, much better alternative to using never. The never condition, unless you're commenting well or have some clear reason for it, I don't think it offers much context at all. So I would suggest using build options in a number of different forms. The request parameter can do some interesting things beyond probably what it was designed for out of the box. Maybe it was designed to do some interesting things. But basically, you can pass information from page to page without needing a specific item. And you can use it to log information just behind the scenes for you. Call a page like you normally would, even inside the definition that you would have for a target to say, we'll go to this page, pass these items. You can have in there a request value that's passed or defined to do that login that you have the opportunity to do here. And dynamic actions, heaps of different behaviors, heaps of different things you can do. And I've seen so many examples of dynamic actions out there that do so many different things in so many different ways. Sometimes I think it can be overwhelming. There are some examples I've got from my perspective that allow you to do little things that don't require too much knowledge of JavaScript or how it all works. Usually one line or two gets us a long way. So that's me. My session has not yet expired, but I've run out of material in this particular case. And time for questions and answers. Question, yes, it is hot in this room now that I've closed it, and we're here in Australia, it's still quite hot. So hopefully I can open that up again soon, and give plenty of time for the next session.
All right, hold on a second. There's a number of questions if you don't mind.
I bet there is.
Okay, you ready? So Ilmars asks, when you hide a button with the class, can the user still get the button back by manipulating CSS/JS?
Yes, they could. They could go into use the inspect element tool that we saw earlier today by Daniel, perhaps, and yeah, redisplay that button. So that's what I was talking about when we might want some server-side validation on whatever that button does, because if the user still somehow sends that messages down to the server, we want to make sure that whoever it is has the privilege to do whatever that button did. So yes, if you're not, so if you're only hiding it through CSS, you need that extra check. But if you're hiding it through the SQL statement itself and not rendering the button at all, then that's another layer of security. But I guess the argument could be made that you would still need to secure that pure SQL process that actions that, because you can use some tamper tools that allow you to send any messages to the server. So that's why we should have our server-side validation all the time. So that's how I respond to that question.
Okay. I was thinking about this in the development of that therapeutic learning system. Again, one of the issues we came across, Shakib might remember it better than me, is we wanted to give the appearance, or basically make an item on the page appear, maybe it was read-only, with CSS. But when we did this, when we changed the attribute, it also did not submit it to session state, which is totally not what we wanted. And you have to be careful in situations like this, right? So it looks like it's read only, but there's other downstream effects of doing that.
Yeah, I think page items in particular have certain nuances that I've always had trouble sort of wrapping my head around with display items. So buttons and items, I think, are just a little bit different, but yeah, I think it holds true for both. There's
Sure.
nuances to consider.
So I don't know if this is I don't know if this is related to your talk. I've actually been thinking about writing a blog post on this. So M. Haji says, what is the fastest, simplest way to set selected records for an interactive grid using DA? I've been trying that for a while now.
Yes, I think I've got something drafted on this too. So basically you're describing, say, a number of records checked, or sorry, a number of records displayed on the page with a few of them checked, and you want to quickly identify that list of records?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, not only, I think instead, though, using a dynamic action to select records, right? So I've started a blog post where using the JavaScript APIs for interactive grid, I'm able to capture which rows are selected and save that to an item. But I think what he's saying is, he or she, what's the fastest, simple way to set selected records for an interactive grid using a dynamic action?
It'll probably be very similar. I'm just thinking off the top of the head here. You'd be using a selector to identify those rows that you wanted to action, maybe via a class that's assigned to one of those columns, and that would give you a list of objects with that jQuery selector call, which you could then action. And in this case, maybe it's flicking a switch, a checkbox. So there's probably a couple of different ways. And I've either done a post recently, or I've drafted one, or I've seen one, that kind of covers this. Maybe not.
Sure. Yep. Marco from Bilog in Croatia sent a link in the doc for the set selected records of the interactive grid API. There we go.
Yeah, there's probably a number of APIs here that I'm not familiar with, because I'm not a huge user of grids yet. So there might be something pre-built that makes this easy.
Okay, Rick, who I recognize, this is an Oracle employee. He said, Scott, are these your own astronomy photographs?
Unfortunately not. Well, the very first one of that was slide 3. That was from the Cassini probe, so certainly not mine. That was some spaceship flying around Saturn for about a decade. Amazing project to learn about. And this one here was just one I found later, or earlier today, sorry, off Astronomy Picture of the Day. But no, I am saving my pennies to get some equipment to take my own photos. But I have not yet got the equipment.
Okay. Another one, this is from Joseph. He says, how about a dynamic list query for 3-layer hierarchical menus in app? I'm not sure this is related to your topic.
Oh, how about that? Well, yeah, I mean, jQuery ideas could lead you onto many paths, but yeah, that one's a hard question to answer with little information over this medium.
Okay. So we also have some incoming questions from attendee Joel. He's first time, long time. What's the most interesting project you've worked on with Apex?
It was tablet based, I think. The one that inspired the book I wrote. It was a tablet based project. It was started when we were on 4.2, and we basically had to create an application that people would take on site to use to mark things off, to interact with the enterprise application, and to think. And I'm pointing to this unseen tablet over here. We're used to building applications for desktops, or many of us are. As a former forms programmer, that was essentially what my job was, to build applications for a desktop, which I guess in those days some of the screens weren't that big anyway, but we really had to be mindful of the fact that we only had 10 inches. And it made us think a lot differently about how we were designing the workflow of the applications and minimizing the amount of keyboard entry that people have versus just being able to push buttons and to move data from there to there using a button push, as opposed to something that required more keyboard activity. So for me, that was quite fascinating, because we did end up with something that, particularly for the users that we were dealing with, they had large hands. They were the construction workers. They did all tend to have quite muscular fingers with big things that they had to push. So we had to be really mindful of this and minimize what we had on the page, but still enable them to interact and move around. And now we're seeing that application that we built, good 8-9 years ago, that we haven't touched that much, and it's been in an environment that's upgraded Apex versions from that original 4.0 up to now we're operating on 19.2, and we haven't really needed to touch it much along the way, which thank you very much, Apex team. But we're now reskinning that application and inside the universal theme to match up with all the other applications that we've got using the universal theme. So to see that application that we built so many years ago, reskinned, thought about in a more modern way, and giving itself new life. It's a gift that keeps on giving, that little project. That's my answer. Ooh,
I love it. Another hot one coming in from attendee Joel. Without identifying customer names, what are you involved in today? And is Apex just one technology in your toolkit?
Working on another portion of that application. We're in a company where we build houses, so the project length is long, and there's so many parts of that portion of building a house that needs some form of Apex help. So we're just doing another portion of that lifespan of building a house. So it's interesting because it's an easy business case, because it's kind of easy to work out how to build a house. So applying the knowledge of sort of steps that are required to build a house and turning that into an Apex application and pushing your business processes around, it's nice and rewarding because you're helping the user out. We're seeing them use some systems that are so old, but have stood the test of time. Like some of the applications that they're using now are a Forms 4.5 applications that we're replacing. But they're still working and they're still happy with them. And they're saying, well, we still want it to kind of work this way, but yeah, sure, like give us a new environment so we're not dealing with a character-based screen. So for me, being able to make their lives easier with the Apex product and do it quickly. Like most of the time we're spending is cleaning up the data model, legacy data model that's been around for a long time for a rework or a rethink. And when it comes to the Apex side of things, like building the UI around it, it just happens so fast, and we give them something and think, oh, well, that's kind of great. Can we tweak this and move that around? And we spend a bit of time on making it even nicer for them. So we're taking them from a horrible world where they're doing all sorts of things in lots of different systems to having this one Oracle database that's using Oracle Apex to help them engage and interact. So no, we're not really using other technologies. Well, I guess like the files we're putting on Azure, and I'm not really involved with that except for calling the relevant PL SQL to say, hey, someone's uploaded a file and they put it somewhere. But it's mostly Oracle tech and Apex tech, and it's fun.
And so do you do a fair amount of forms to Apex migrations, or are these sporadic?
Sporadic, I would say. The application we're building is partially coming from forms, partially coming from people's spreadsheets, partially incorporating a business process that can be automated in some form, but still requiring the users to apply their thoughts and think as well. But yeah, I'm occasionally going to Oracle Forms Builder and looking into things to see how things used to work, and then trying to adapt that to the Apex world. And same with Oracle Reports, now turning some of those into AOP. That's been a wonderful exercise using the AOP product. Very much enjoying that, and that's a fun exercise too, taking SQL written in 9i or whenever this SQL was written and thinking, well, yeah, we can refactor this at the same time and use features that are now available to us to make things go faster, be easy to maintain because the code is smaller and cleaner and easier to read. So I'm enjoying the project work very much so.
One last question, and I'll leave you off the hot seat. But I saved the best for last here. If Apex didn't exist, let's say it never existed ever, what would you be doing today? Or what would you be using?
That is a very good question. And I've seen that come up on Twitter or somewhere once before. That is a darn good question, because before this I was doing forms work, and pretty full-on forms work. I did a project with Connor at one point, which was a great way to learn, working with someone like him. But it was such a complex environment, complex business cases, and maybe I'd still be doing Oracle Forms work, or maybe I would have realised that Forms is still kicking pretty hard. I'd like to think maybe I'll be doing something other than Forms. I really don't know. I'm curious, and I wonder what other people's answers might be, but I wouldn't be sure.
Yeah,
I'm in the spot I'm in now.
And Suzanne asked, so do you like Forms or Apex better? Oh, Suzanne, it's all uppercase, by the way, not a NitCap Apex. Do you like Forms or Apex better? I guess that's kind of an odd question. Do you like
Forms was easier to pronounce correctly.
Yeah.
I'm still working on the Apex thing, and around the office as well. There's a lot of people. I mean, it's great because a lot of our clients are referring to the system as Apex, not as some random name, but they're actually calling it the Apex system, which I'm sure you might appreciate, Joel, the fact that they're calling it Apex. But they're probably normally pronouncing it Apex.
No boy.
So I'm working on that. I forgot what the question was, but
oh yeah, what do you like better, Forms or Apex? It's kind of
Forms or Apex. And now that I've revisited Forms in going in to do that migration type process, remembering some of the things that I didn't enjoy with forms that have just been refined. Because, I mean, Apex is still very similar to Oracle Forms. For anyone that has done Oracle Forms work and then has done Apex work, so many similarities. And I'm sure that the Oracle team has learned from the past with forms. So I think, yeah, Apex is a cleaner product. It's faster. It's obviously for the modern world. There's only so many places you can go with Oracle Forms. So yeah, I think it's a more scalable dynamic product. But yeah, I guess there might have been one or two advantages in Forms that I miss. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there's always a balance, isn't there? Some pros and cons.
That's right. I mean, people ask, can they use the utilities that let you access the client side file system? Of course, you can't, right? It's a browser based application. It's not really a limitation of Apex.
But should you still be doing that, or should you be doing something else instead, like interacting with the cloud somehow?
So I have a funny story to tell, and then we can wrap up about I can always spin a good yarn. As part of this whole therapeutic learning system initiative, we were in a meeting, and we were waiting for, can I say this? I'm going to say it anyways. We were waiting for Larry Ellison to join, and our CEO, Safra Katz, was on there. And I'm a huge fan of Safra Katz. I'm her number one fan in Oracle. I've seen her transform this company in so many positive ways. And in this meeting, while we're waiting for Larry to join, Safra pronounced it Apex. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not sure I can take it. And so I came off of mute and I profusely apologized. And I said, Safra, I'm sorry to do this, but I want you to be in the know. It's pronounced Apex. And she said, but it's Application Express. Shouldn't it be Apex? And I said, Safra, I'm sorry, it's Apex. So then eventually Larry joined and we're in this meeting. And at one point, Larry pronounced it Apex. And Shakib sent me a message on Slack that he said, hey, Joel, are you going to correct Larry too? And I was like, I'm good. It's Apex it is. But eventually he picked up this Apex.
Well, the problem that we had is being in Australia, we didn't really hear other people saying it for a while. And we went through the same thought process, Application Express, Apex, that works. And then we get visitors come to Australia and they're describing it, Apex and Varchar and all these other strange sounding words. And some of them you get used to and some of them you don't.
You know who validated the all uppercase spelling of Apex? Because this is a person who had mastery of the English language like no other. Scott Spatafor, who's no longer with us, is when we were talking about, and he gave all these examples of acronyms which really, turned into words and why this was appropriate. And so it's also in Scott's honor that I'm proud that we continue this. I think that's it. Well done, Scott. Thanks for joining us today. And I think everybody, you have a full 7 minutes. So the next session will start at top of the hour. Thanks, Scott. Great seeing you.
Catch you later.